Well, been a while since I did one of these, and people have been wanting me to continue, and seeing as I still don't have my camera, well, the audio thing is the only option. So, well, here we go. Today we're going to be focusing on the Saiyans. Now, the thing about the Saiyans that always fascinates me is how easily people seem to think that they were good guys. No, really. I've actually seen that argument every time. Whenever someone does any kind of like fan work or anything, whenever there's like an extra Saiyan popping up, 8 times out of 10 they're a good guy. Or they'll have two show up, one good, one bad. Like they're somehow inherently good or something like that. It's perplexing how people come to that conclusion. It really is. I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that the ones that we see being well, for the most part that we see being Goku, Gohan, Trunks, Goten, so on and so forth. People automatically then assume that, they were just good guys. Or that they would have been good guys if it hadn't been for that. No. See, the thing about the Saiyans is that they were barbaric and, tended to be pretty dang violent before Frieza even showed up. The reason that Frieza showed up to, well, we'll get to that as it comes. But, it's this concept that they're good guys, or that they're, they'd probably most likely be good if it hadn't been for Frieza or whatever, needs to get thrown out right now. I'm just saying. Okay? Because not everything that they did at Frieza's whim, as it were. Now, moving on. The Saiyans are, well, as I said, a very barbaric race. Or at least were at one time. They finally sort of became civilized after a while. But they were very, very Spartan-esque culture. From childhood, your power level was measured, and depending on what it was, it was then determined how useful you would be to their society, whether or not you stayed or got sent on some throwaway suicide mission, or, what your position in life would be. Very Spartan in that sense. Very Spartan, very Hunnic, very, it also has a lot to do with their hierarchy, which I'm going to kind of touch on a little bit too, or at least a theory on their hierarchy. And of course, well, the drill, monkey men turn into a giant ape when they see the full moon, that sort of thing, giant monkey, whatever. Yeah, that's, apparently there actually is a big, like, fight going on the internet about whether or not they're actually giant apes or giant monkeys because of the tails. Yeah, I really don't think it matters either way. I mean, this ain't science class, so. But yeah, that actually does go on. And the thing about the Saiyans is, I really don't know how to touch on this. It's an entire group of people. It's a lot harder to focus on than a single one. I can focus on each individual Saiyan, sure, but I kind of want to cover the whole race as a whole first. What fascinates me, like I said, about how people think they were guys, is no, they were actually pretty violent before Frieza. So, I mean, they still did things outside of Frieza's orders, too. Goku being sent to Earth, for example, to conquer it, to sell it. That wasn't necessarily Frieza's order. In fact, you'd think that Frieza would be the one who was more upset about it. In fact, Frieza almost didn't seem to know anything about them going to Earth to look for a Saiyan that had been sent there. I'm not sure he was even aware that mission was supposed to take place. So, it really seems to me like the Saiyans were actually still pillaging on their own. They just also had to do whatever Frieza wanted. These were not really good guys, not even in the case of Bardock. Bardock had still committed multiple cases of genocide. He had still, gone on a killing spree, and even though he sort of finally stood up to Frieza, it wasn't really until his own people were the ones who were going to be the target of being wiped out. In that sense, he's sort of heroic in that he actually stood up to him when no one else would, but at the same time, he wouldn't necessarily do it if it hadn't been for the fact that the Saiyans were the ones who were going to be wiped out. Had he seen all these other races that were going to get wiped out? Had he seen their faces and the faces of their children? I'm not so sure he would have cared. So, while he is commendable in that sense for doing that, at the same time, I'm not entirely convinced that it was necessarily a major, big, heroic event. You know, that'll, you know, that's fairly debatable, to be honest. Now, when it comes to the Saiyan hierarchy, a lot of people are confused as to what it means. That since Vegeta's the prince and his father is dead, that means that he's therefore the king, so why does he call himself the prince? Well, we'd have to study two sort of political structures that existed on Earth at some point when it came to cultures that are very similar to the Saiyan hierarchy. As I said, they're very Spartan, very Hunnic, very Mongolian, so to speak, in terms of how they're raised for battle, how their governmental structure seemed to work. They had a king, yes. And the son of the king was pretty much the first in line to take over, yes. But, see, in cultures that were similar to this, the only way, first of all, to become a king, you have to have a coronation. You have to be crowned such. You can't just assume the title after your daddy dies. That's why so many times there are cases where people will try to assassinate a prince or whatever before the coronation, because that puts them out of the line, and they were never the king, so they didn't really kill the king, so on and so forth, etc., yada yada. Now, well, oftentimes, though, what would happen is, in structures like this, in societies like this, the prince, the king's son, so, he would have to essentially prove that he was ready to lead first. And in a warrior culture like this, the way that was most often done was they had to fight. They had to prove who was the stronger. They had to prove that the son had become stronger than the father and therefore was more fit to lead. That he was a better, more capable leader. That he was a more powerful man than his father. Now, for Vegeta, that probably would have been no problem had his father not been killed before that was possible. When that happened, his birthright, his chance to essentially take the throne, had been taken from him by Frieza. And that's one reason why when he learned that, he was so dead set on making Frieza pay, on getting revenge. He even said specifically it had nothing to do with his people. He didn't necessarily care about that. It was what Frieza had taken from him. It was what he had stolen from them. It was his honor. It was his birthright to show that he had become the strongest and become their king. And it's also why when he couldn't beat Frieza and he actually had to beg Goku to do it, the structure, the societal structure, Goku technically was one of the weakest Saiyans that had ever been born. And that's according to their societal structure, he was. That's why they threw him away like that. He should have just been, nothing. And when they, when the fact that he was literally laying there dying, essentially. Well, not essentially, he was. And that he had to beg someone who should have been nothing, who was the lowest of the low in their culture, to do what he could not do, what he was not strong enough to do, to admit that he was stronger than even him, tore him apart. It did. It's frankly the reason he was crying when he died. The fact that he had to literally submit to Goku, basically consent that he was stronger than him. It's also why he then became obsessed with beating him, surpassing him. Now, again, this is sort of assumptive. It's never specifically laid out in the manga, but I think that it's very, very strongly hinted at. When you look at how the culture works and everything, how it's explained to work. You look at, especially in like the Hunnic and Mongolian cultures, Asian cultures in general, you know, the concept of honor is very strong, and in more specific terms, the fact that that's also a lot of where these warrior cultures were, where you had to beat your competitor or your father, as it were, to prove that you were the stronger. You know, it sprang from there. So it's not something that would necessarily be foreign to Akira Toriyama as he was writing. So there's that. But let's just focus mostly on the characters themselves.